Please. Help! They're hurting my mom. The hum of the ventilation system was the only sound that belonged to this hour. It was nearly midnight in the glass and steel tower of Novodyne Energy, a monument of modern wealth where the lights never truly went out. The world slept beneath it. But Daniel Cross, pushing his cart of tools and rags across the 47th floor, had long forgotten what sleep felt like. He moved with quiet precision, not like a janitor, but like a man trained to leave no trace. His uniform bore the smudges of honest work. His eyes carried something else entirely, an old, disciplined emptiness. He paused by the panoramic window overlooking the city. From this height, even pain looked distant, almost elegant. Then the sound came, a muffled crack, a woman's strangled cry. And just like that, Daniel's body remembered. He froze in place, every muscle coiled, pulse hammering in his throat. The noise came from the executive boardroom at the end of the corridor, a place far above his pay grade, a world he was meant to mop around, not enter. He should have turned away. He had promised himself he would never step into violence again. But then, the door opened. A small figure slipped through, stumbling into the fluorescent light of the hallway. A girl, no older than 6. Her hair was tangled, her breath coming in shuddering gasps. She looked up at him, the man in the gray uniform, the ghost of this building, and whispered, her voice trembling against the edge of tears, "Please, help. They're hurting my mom." Those 6 words detonated in Daniel's chest like an old mine exploding after years of silence. For 5 years he had buried the soldier, the medic, the man who once ran toward gunfire instead of away. He had traded rifles for mops, battlefields for boiler rooms. He thought he had finally silenced the part of himself that lived on adrenaline and loss. But not tonight. He knelt, meeting the girl's terrified eyes. "What's your name?" "Ella," she whispered. "They said she has to sign something. She won't. They're hurting her." Daniel rose slowly. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, the kind that could hold chaos still. "Stay behind me, Ella. Whatever happens, don't make a sound." He placed her behind his rolling cart and turned toward the boardroom door. The light beneath it flickered faintly. Shadows moved on the frosted glass. The hum of the city below seemed to fade until the only sound left was the pounding of his heart. When his hand touched the door handle, the world split in two, the quiet life he had built behind him and the storm waiting beyond. He pushed the door open. The room was a cathedral of wealth, polished marble, glass walls, a chandelier made of cold light, and in the middle of it, violence. 3 men in black suits surrounded a woman. Her white blouse was torn at the shoulder, one side of her face bloodied. Dr. Mira Vallon, CEO of Novodyne, the face from 100 glossy magazines, was on her knees, gasping, defiant, broken, but unbent. "Sign it!" one of them barked, shoving a tablet toward her. "You know how this ends otherwise." She spat blood on the floor, her voice raw. "Tell Lucan he can burn with his empire." The man's jaw tightened. He raised the back of his hand and froze mid-motion, because Daniel was already there. The nearest assailant didn't even have time to turn. A single step, a twist of the wrist, and the man's arm snapped with a sound like cracking wood. Daniel pivoted, using his momentum to drive the attacker face first into the conference table. Glass shattered. The second man lunged, swinging a heavy baton. Daniel sidestepped, his movement smooth, surgical. His elbow drove into the man's sternum, collapsing breath and will in one strike. The third reached for a gun. Wrong choice. Daniel's hand shot forward, twisting the weapon free and slamming its butt into the man's jaw. He went down hard, unmoving. Silence swallowed the room. Only the faint hum of the lights remained. Dr. Miravallen stared at him, disbelieving. This man in maintenance gray, standing amidst the wreckage of her attackers, chest rising and falling with calm precision. Who are you? She stammered. Daniel glanced toward the door where little Ella peeked through the crack, her face streaked with tears. He knelt beside Mira, checking her pulse, his voice calm, clinical. I used to fix broken systems, he said softly. Now I just clean floors. Her breath hitched as his hands moved with practiced certainty, checking her pupils, feeling for fractures. The soldier's discipline returned like a haunting rhythm. He tore a strip of his sleeve, pressed it gently against the cut above her eyebrow. Can you stand? I think so, she whispered. Who sent them? Lucan Drex, Daniel finished for her. He wants your signature. Her eyes widened. You know him? I know his type. He helped her up. We need to leave. Now. As they moved toward the exit, Ella rushed into her mother's arms, sobbing. Mira clutched her daughter, trembling, then looked up at Daniel. Where will we go? Daniel's gaze swept the hallway beyond, polished, sterile, full of lies. Somewhere they won't think to look, he said. Where's that? He met her eyes, steady, cold, alive. The basement, where the ghosts live. He pushed open the maintenance door, guiding them into the dark maze of service corridors, and behind them, the shining empire of Novodyne burned with quiet, invisible corruption. The service corridor was a world apart from the glittering offices above, narrow, humming, alive with pipes and the low growl of machinery. Fluorescent lights flickered weakly, throwing shadows that crawled like ghosts across the concrete walls. Daniel moved fast, every motion precise, economical. He knew this maze better than the executives who signed his paychecks. He'd spent years in its veins, fixing broken valves, tracing leaks, listening to the silent language of a building that never slept. Behind him, Mira stumbled, one arm wrapped protectively around Ella. Her breath came ragged, the adrenaline fading into shock. Daniel slowed just enough to steady her, his hand firm on her elbow. Keep moving, he murmured. We'll be safe in the sublevel. Where are we going? She managed. The ghost floor, he said. Maintenance tunnels. Cameras don't reach there. The words meant nothing to her yet, but his tone, calm, absolute, gave her something to hold on to. They descended 2 flights of steel stairs, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the hum of industrial fans. Daniel pushed open a heavy door marked Restricted Access, Electrical Systems. The air inside was hot, metallic, filled with the scent of oil and ozone. Rows of dormant generators stood like iron beasts in the half-light. Daniel closed the door behind them, sliding a rusted latch into place. Ella clung to her mother's coat, her small shoulders trembling. Daniel knelt, his voice softening. Hey, look at me, Ella. The girl hesitated, then lifted her tear-streaked face. You were very brave up there, he said gently. You did the right thing. Her lips quivered. They hurt Mommy. I know. His tone stayed calm, grounding. But she's safe now. You kept her safe. Mira sank to the floor beside a generator, her strength collapsing under the weight of the night. The side of her face was swelling. Her blouse was torn, stained with blood. Daniel's instincts shifted, soldier to medic. He retrieved a small metal case from his tool cart, one that didn't belong in any janitor's kit. Opening it revealed gauze, antiseptic, butterfly bandages, a field dressing, and a tourniquet folded with military precision. Mira's gaze flicked to the kit, then back to him. You're not just maintenance, are you? He didn't answer immediately. He poured antiseptic onto a gauze pad and began cleaning the cut above her brow. She winced as the alcohol bit her skin. I was an Army Ranger, he said finally, his voice quiet. Medic unit. Afghanistan, then West Africa. Too many broken things to fix. Why are you here? He shrugged. Because fixing air ducts pays better than fixing memories. Her eyes softened. For a heartbeat, empathy breaking through the fog of fear. You walked away. More like limped, he said, a faint, dry humor ghosting across his lips. A sudden metallic thud shattered the fragile silence. Mira flinched. Daniel was already on his feet, his head tilted slightly, listening. It came again, a door slamming somewhere above them, muffled voices, male, angry. The hunt had begun. They're sweeping the upper floors, he murmured. Lucan's people will move fast. Mira's voice trembled. How do you know it's him? Because security doesn't storm the executive suite without orders, and Lucan Drex doesn't leave fingerprints. He moved to the corner of the room, kneeling beside a grated vent. With a practiced hand, he loosened 4 bolts and slid it open. The narrow tunnel beyond disappeared into darkness. Ella peered over his shoulder, wide-eyed. It's so dark. Daniel turned to her. It's not darkness, kid. It's quiet. Quiet means safe. He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket, switched it on, and handed it to her. The weak beam danced along the tunnel walls. You lead the light. I'll follow. Mira hesitated at the entrance. You're sure about this? No, he said honestly. But it's the only way that doesn't end with us in a morgue. She nodded, clutching Ella tighter, and crawled into the tunnel. Daniel followed, sealing the vent behind him with a twist of his multi-tool. The world shrank to the sound of breathing, the scrape of shoes on metal, and the pulse of their own hearts. The tunnel sloped downward, cold air rising from unseen depths. Halfway through, Mira stopped. Daniel, why help us? You don't even know me. His voice echoed faintly in the steel passage. Because 5 years ago, I couldn't save my daughter. The words hit her like a quiet explosion. She turned, flashlight trembling in her hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. He didn't reply. Some griefs didn't need answers. They crawled until the tunnel opened into a small concrete chamber, the sub-basement. It was filled with shadows and the soft drip of condensation. An old emergency light flickered overhead. Daniel stood, dusting off his hands. Welcome to the ghost corridor. No cameras, no sensors, no eyes. Mira managed a faint, weary smile. How do you know all this? Because I wired half of it. He walked to a locked metal cabinet on the far wall and pried it open. Inside was a tangle of cables, an old fuse box, and behind it, a narrow panel leading into a storage bay. He pushed it aside, revealing a small maintenance room with a cot, canned food, bottled water, and a first aid supply. Mira stared. You've done this before. Emergency shelter, he said simply. Never thought I'd need it for anyone but me. He poured water into a cup and handed it to her. Drink, slowly. She took it with trembling hands. The metallic taste of the water felt oddly grounding. Ella sat beside her, head resting on her mother's lap, eyes heavy with exhaustion. When Daniel finally spoke again, his voice had softened. They'll realize you're gone soon. When they do, they'll start rewriting the story. By morning, the news will say you resigned, fled, maybe even stole from your own company. Mira's eyes widened. You've seen this before. He nodded. Different countries, same tactics. She looked up at him, the janitor who wasn't. Then what do we do? Daniel glanced toward the single flickering light bulb. We vanish, until I can figure out who Lucan's paying and how deep this goes. And then... He looked at the sleeping child in her arms, then at the woman who refused to break. His eyes were steady, the calm before a storm. Then, he said, we take your world back. The air in the sub-basement hung thick with dust and machine oil. Hours had passed since they'd crawled through the vent, yet the adrenaline hadn't left Mira's veins. Every creak in the pipes above made her flinch. Daniel sat across from her on an overturned crate, stripping the blood from his knuckles with a rag soaked in rubbing alcohol. The sharp scent bit through the air. For a while, neither spoke. Ella was curled up on the cot under Daniel's old army jacket, breathing evenly now. Oh. The child's quiet sleep was the only mercy this night had given them. Finally, Mira's voice broke the silence. Lucan won't stop? Daniel didn't look up. I know. He wants control of Novodyne. I refuse to sell him the prototype grid, the self-sustaining model. He thinks he can take it by force. Daniel finished wrapping a bandage around his wrist. Men like him don't think. They consume. And when you say no, you stop being a person. You become a problem. She met his eyes. You've seen this before, haven't you? He nodded slowly. Different flags. Same men. A low rumble passed overhead, the dull vibration of freight elevators moving again. Daniel rose, instinct sharpening. They're searching the lower levels. Mira stood immediately. How can they find us down here? They can't, not if we keep moving. He crossed the room, pulled open a floor grate, and pointed to a sloping tunnel vanishing into blackness. This leads to the geothermal ducts, old service passages, no surveillance, no maps. Mira stared into the hole. You've memorized all this? Daniel's lips curved faintly. When you live in the walls, you learn every artery. He slung his worn canvas bag over his shoulder, grabbed a flashlight, and offered her his hand. Stay close. If I stop, you stop. The tunnel was narrow, forcing them to walk single file. The deeper they went, the more the air changed, heavy with warmth from underground conduits, humming with unseen current. Mira's voice echoed softly behind him. You really built this escape route? Not for escaping, for maintenance. But I like options. A hint of humor flickered in his tone. Dry, restrained, but real. Ella stirred in her mother's arms, murmuring in her sleep. Mira brushed a hand through her daughter's hair, whispering, We're almost safe, baby. Daniel slowed his pace. Don't promise her that yet, he said quietly. Safety's a word. We need distance. They reached a small maintenance junction, an underground crossroads of rusted pipes and flickering yellow light. Daniel crouched, pulling open a metal cabinet built into the wall. Inside lay an old tablet wrapped in plastic and a folded city schematic. Mira raised a brow. You keep a tablet down here? He smiled thinly. Some people keep guns. I prefer maps. He powered it on. The cracked screen glowed weakly, displaying the labyrinth beneath downtown. Old power conduits, service tunnels, forgotten construction routes. He traced a finger along one path. This line connects to the old metro line. If we follow it, we can surface near the river. I know a place there. Mira frowned. You have a lot of places. Daniel's jaw tightened. Old habits die slower than people. They walked for what felt like hours. The sound of dripping water became their only rhythm. At one point, a tremor ran through the walls, the muffled thunder of trains above. Listen, Daniel murmured. That's the city. right above our heads. Through a gap in the concrete, Mira glimpsed streaks of light from the metro tunnel, the roar of a train passing like a heartbeat of the sleeping giant above them. She whispered, "So close. And yet—" "Untouchable," Daniel finished. "Up there they build towers. Down here, we bury what those towers cost." They rested at an intersection where the tunnel widened into a forgotten maintenance bay. Old crates sat in corners, draped in cobwebs. A single flickering bulb buzzed overhead. Mira set Ella down on a blanket and turned to Daniel. "You said you lost your daughter." He froze, mid-motion, as he adjusted the map. She continued softly. "You saved mine tonight. I just want to understand." For a long moment, the only sound was the buzz of the light. Then Daniel spoke, voice low and hollow. "She was 7. Her name was Sophie. I came home on leave, 2 weeks before deployment. Car crash, drunk driver. I survived. She didn't." Mira's breath caught. "Daniel." He closed the tablet, the light fading. "After that, I couldn't go back. I didn't trust myself to lead anyone again. So I took the kind of job where nobody asked me to save the world." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of grief and of the strange, quiet understanding between two people who had both lost parts of themselves to the same cruel fire. Suddenly, Ella whimpered in her sleep, a coughing fit shaking her small body. Mira rushed to her, panic flooding her voice. "She's burning up." Daniel knelt beside them, pressed a hand to the girl's forehead. Too warm. He checked her breathing, his focus snapping back into the calm precision of a medic. "It's the smoke she inhaled," he murmured. "And the stress. We need clean air, water, and rest. If we stay down here too long, it'll get worse." He looked toward the far end of the bay, where a set of rusted steps led upward to a maintenance hatch. "There's an old supply depot 2 blocks from the river. If we can reach it, I can get medicine." Mira nodded, clutching Ella close. "Let's go." Daniel rose, adjusted the strap on his bag, and offered her a hand. "Careful on the stairs. They haven't been used since this city was honest." She managed a faint, breathless laugh. "Was it ever?" His expression softened. "Maybe once, before men like Lucan started selling the sunlight." He pushed the hatch open. A rush of cold air swept in, carrying the distant hum of the city above. Sirens, engines, rain. Daniel glanced back at her, eyes steady, alive again with the fire he thought he'd buried. "Welcome back to the surface," he said. "Now the real hunt begins." Rain slanted across the river district, slicing the sodium light into 1,000 trembling reflections. Puddles rippled under the hum of power lines, and the air smelled of rust, oil, and rain-soaked concrete. Daniel pushed the hatch open and climbed out first, scanning the alley with the cautious rhythm of a man who trusted nothing that breathed. Mira followed, clutching the half-awake Ella to her chest. The girl's cough came in shallow bursts. The surface felt unreal after hours underground. Too wide, too loud. Across the street, the skeletal remains of an old train station stood abandoned, its glass roof shattered, ivy clawing up the iron girders. Daniel nodded toward it. "Come on. We'll take shelter there." Inside, the air was thick with damp. The station's old clock hung frozen at 3:17, its face cracked like bone. Daniel found a dry corner behind a stack of rusted crates, motioned for them to sit, then peeled off his jacket and laid it beneath the child. Mira brushed the wet hair from Ella's forehead. "She's burning again." Daniel crouched beside them, opening his canvas bag. His movements were methodical, flashlight balanced between his teeth, hands unshaking. He mixed a small packet of electrolyte powder into a bottle of water, tested the temperature, then handed it to Mira. "Small sips every few minutes," he said. "If she starts breathing shallow or her lips turn blue, you tell me immediately." Mira nodded, clutching the bottle as though it were a lifeline. Then she asked the question she'd been afraid of since they met. "Daniel, how did you know Lucan would do this?" He paused, wiping rainwater from his brow. The flickering light carved sharp lines across his face, lines that spoke of deserts, ambushes, and too many missions gone wrong. "Because I worked for men like him," he said quietly. "Different uniforms, same hunger." "You were military," she said. "But this isn't just combat training. You think like intelligence." Daniel looked away. "That's what the Rangers used to call it. I just called it surviving." Mira studied him for a long moment. "You built an entire escape network under this city. You have caches, maps, supplies. You weren't just hiding from life, were you?" His voice was flat, but honest. "You don't come home from war, Mira. You just change battlefields." Thunder rolled across the river, followed by a flash of light. For an instant, through the broken roof, Mira saw the reflection of her own face in the glass shards, pale, blood-streaked, foreign. She whispered, "He'll erase me, just like he erased tonight." "The news will say there was a power malfunction, maybe a gas leak. Tomorrow, Luke and Drex will be shaking hands with senators again." Daniel turned his head slightly. "He can rewrite headlines, not bodies. He left evidence, and I know where." Her eyes snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "Every executive floor has a parallel network, an emergency power loop. It records every energy spike, every door override. When those men forced entry, it was logged in the building's core." "You mean proof?" He nodded. "If I can access the backup drive, we can prove this wasn't an accident. But it's stored inside Novadine's central relay, the one place Lucan will never expect you to go back to." Mira gave a short, bitter laugh. "You're insane." Daniel smiled faintly. "Probably." A sound cut through the storm, the crunch of tires on wet pavement. Daniel's expression shifted instantly. He motioned Mira to silence, then slid his pistol, one of the confiscated weapons from the boardroom, from under his jacket. Through a broken window, he saw them, two dark SUVs idling near the end of the alley, headlights off. A man in a raincoat stepped out, speaking into an earpiece. "Damn it," Daniel muttered. "They're sweeping the industrial blocks." Mira's whisper trembled. "How? How did they find us so fast?" "Lucan doesn't need police," he said grimly. "He is the police here." He glanced back toward Ella, who was starting to stir. Mira reached to calm her, whispering lullabies through her shaking voice. Daniel's mind was already moving. Angles, escape routes, timing. He scanned the ceiling. An old maintenance gantry stretched across the length of the station, leading to a side window half concealed by vines. "Perfect." "Pack up," he said. "We're leaving." They climbed the rusted staircase as quietly as possible. Daniel went first, testing each step for sound. Below, the muffled voices grew louder, flashlights slicing through the rain as two men entered the station. Mira froze halfway up the stairs, clutching Ella tight. The beam of a flashlight swept across the far wall, pausing inches from where they stood in shadow. Daniel raised a hand, signaling stillness. For 10 heartbeats, time stopped. Then the beam moved on. He leaned close to Mira, whispering, "Now." They crossed the gantry, rain streaming through the holes in the roof. Daniel smashed the side window with his elbow, muffling the sound beneath a crack of thunder, and helped them climb through. Outside, the air hit them like ice. The alley was narrow and steep, leading toward the riverfront where fog coiled thick as smoke. They slipped into it, vanishing from sight as the men below shouted, realizing the place was empty. When they finally stopped, breathless, under an overpass, Mira sank to the ground, holding her daughter close. Her voice was barely a whisper. "How long can we keep running?" Daniel crouched beside her, his gaze fixed on the distant skyline, the glow of Novodyne Tower piercing the fog like a blade. "Until we stop being prey," he said. Mira looked up at him, weary but fierce. "And then?" "Then we take his tower apart, one circuit at a time." Rain drummed against the concrete above, echoing like gunfire. In that sound, Mira realized something she hadn't before. The janitor who had saved her wasn't just a man haunted by the past. He was preparing for war. The city looked different from the riverfront. From here, Novodyne Tower wasn't a monument. It was a wound of glass and electricity, pulsing through the fog like a living organism. Daniel stood beneath the overpass, water dripping from his jacket, eyes fixed on that skyline. His breath left small clouds in the cold. Behind him, Mira and Ella slept under a pile of tarps, exhaustion finally winning against fear. He checked his watch, an old analog piece, cracked, still ticking. Time had always been both ally and enemy. Tonight, it was a fuse. He crouched beside Mira, spoke in a low whisper. "When you wake, don't panic. I'll be gone for a few hours. There's food in the pack. If you hear anything strange, don't wait for me. Run north, toward the rail yards. There's an old ranger supply depot there." Mira's eyelids fluttered. "You're leaving?" "I'm going to finish what we started," he said. Her voice broke through the drowsiness, pleading. "You can't go back there. He'll have security locked down." "That's what I'm counting on," he interrupted, softly but certain. "Locked down systems are predictable ones." He adjusted the pistol at his waist, checked the small flash drive clipped inside his sleeve. "Lucan thinks the city belongs to him, but Novodyne runs on circuits I designed before I quit. He never bothered to erase the ghosts I left behind." By the time he reached the financial district, dawn had begun to burn behind the clouds, thin gray lights spilling between towers. The streets were half deserted, wet with last night's storm. Daniel moved like a shadow, blending into the flow of maintenance crews and delivery vans. His ID badge, forged, aged, authentic down to the RFID frequency, slid past the scanner with a soft beep. Access granted. He exhaled slowly. "Hello, old friend." Inside, the tower felt colder than before. The same marble floors, the same echoing silence, but now every camera, every vent, every reflection was a weapon. He took the service elevator down to sublevel 2, where the main electrical core pulsed behind reinforced glass. Rows of servers blinked in steady rhythm, the heart of Novodyne's empire. Daniel set his bag down, opened it. Inside were tools that didn't belong in any janitor's kit. Micro drives, insulated gloves, a bypass device built from scrap radio parts. He began working. Upstairs, in the penthouse office, Lucan Drex stared at the morning news on a wall-sized screen. The headline scrolled, "Novodyne CEO missing after power malfunction. Investigation ongoing." Lucan smiled thinly, swirling his whiskey though it was barely past 7. Behind him, his chief of security, a square-shouldered man named Rice, stepped forward. "We've traced movement in the lower sectors," Rice said. "Someone accessed maintenance 2 hours ago. Badge matches Daniel Cross, former employee terminated 4 years ago." Lucan turned, eyes glinting. "Ah, The janitor with military credentials. I told you he'd resurface. Orders? Lucan set his glass down. Flood the lower floors. No witnesses this time. Make it look like a systems purge. Down in the sublevel, Daniel's fingers moved faster. The display flashed warning symbols, heat spikes, voltage redirections. He muttered to himself, "He's rerouting the grid. Damn it, Lucan." He pulled the circuit fuse, rerouted a secondary line, and connected his drive. The screen blinked. Archive access, 47B, secure log entry, 2243. Unauthorized entry, executive level. Personnel detected, Drex Private Security Division. There it was. Proof. He copied the data, encrypted it, and transferred it to the drive. 2 minutes left. Then the floor trembled. At first it was subtle, a low vibration underfoot. Then came the metallic groan of pressure valves. Daniel's head snapped toward the nearest vent. He's flooding the sector. Son of a... He grabbed his pack, ripped the drive from the console, and ran. Steam burst from the pipes, the lights flickering red. By the time he reached the elevator shaft, the lower tunnels were a boiling haze. He pried open the maintenance hatch, climbed the ladder 2 rungs at a time, heat chasing his heels. At the 20th floor, he forced the doors open, stumbled into a hallway half-choked with smoke. Voices shouted from down the corridor. Armed guards. Daniel ducked behind a column, pulled a small EMP grenade from his belt, one of the few relics he'd kept from his ranger days. He twisted the pin. Let's see if Lucan still believes in ghosts. He tossed it. The pulse detonated with a sharp crack. Lights flickered, cameras died, radios went silent. In that instant of darkness, Daniel ran. Outside, the city was waking. Horns, sirens, the first buses growling down the wet streets. Daniel burst from a side exit, drenched in steam, carrying the only thing that could burn Lucan's empire down. He didn't stop until he reached the old station again. Mira was already on her feet, eyes wide with disbelief. "You came back." He handed her the small metal drive, still warm. Everything he did, every system override, it's all here. Mira held it like it was made of fire. "What now?" "We find someone who can make the world listen," he said. "Someone who isn't afraid of Lucan." Her eyes narrowed. "Who?" Daniel's gaze lifted toward the fog-drenched skyline. "A man I once saved. He owes me a life." Far above them, in his glass office, Lucan watched security feeds flicker back to life. The lower levels were flooded with steam, but one image froze his smile, the faint silhouette of a man leaving through the emergency exit. Lucan leaned forward, whispering to himself. So, the ghost still breathes. He picked up his phone. "Find him. And the woman, before nightfall." By the time the truck climbed into the mist-draped hills north of the city, dawn had given up fighting the fog. The road curved endlessly through pine and shadow, the tires whispering over gravel like a secret being kept too long. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter than he meant to. Mira sat beside him, silent, her daughter asleep across her lap. Ella's head rose and fell with the rhythm of the road. Every now and then, Mira would glance at Daniel, at the stubble on his jaw, the haunted focus in his eyes, and wonder what kind of war could carve a man into such deliberate quiet. Behind them, the world of towers and glass was shrinking, replaced by a silence so pure it hurt. "You sure this friend of yours is still alive?" she asked at last. Daniel's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. If Gabe's dead, he probably hasn't noticed yet. The truck turned off onto a dirt trail that wound through old forest. After a mile, the trees opened into a clearing, and there it was. A cabin, low-roofed and half-hidden in the fog, perched on the edge of Blackwater Lake. The surface of the lake was still as glass, reflecting only gray sky and ghosts of trees. Smoke curled from a crooked chimney. Someone was home. Daniel parked, cut the engine. "Stay here," he said softly, stepping out into the cold. The cabin door opened before he could knock. A broad figure stood in the doorway, flannel shirt, gray beard, one arm ending in an empty sleeve pinned to his chest. His remaining hand held a shotgun loosely, like a man who didn't expect to need it but knew better than to be wrong. "Jesus Christ," the man said, voice rasping like gravel. "If it isn't Daniel Cross." "Hello, Gabe," Daniel said quietly. "You're hard to kill. And you're too stupid to hide." They stared at each other for a beat, the kind of silence that only brothers in arms could share. Then Gabe lowered the gun and stepped aside. "Bring him in. Coffee's still hot." Inside, the air smelled of pine smoke and old wood. Ella stirred awake, blinking at the unfamiliar room. Antlers on the wall, a worn leather chair by the fire, maps pinned like scars. Gabe poured steaming coffee into 2 chipped mugs and eyed Mira. "You must be the trouble." Mira straightened, unflinching. "And you must be the refuge." Gabe chuckled. "I like her." He glanced at Daniel. "You finally brought someone who talks back." Daniel said nothing, just sat near the fire, warming his hands. The flames painted his face in soft gold, but his eyes were elsewhere, listening for something that hadn't yet happened. After breakfast, Gabe pulled Daniel aside to the porch. The fog had lifted just enough to reveal the lake, black and endless. "You know Lucan's got half the city looking for you," Gabe said, voice low. Daniel nodded. "That's why I came here. I need a quiet place to plan." "And the woman?" "She's more than a client." Gabe's brow furrowed. "You getting attached again?" Daniel exhaled through his nose. "She's got a kid, Gabe, a little girl. Reminds me of—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Gabe stared at him for a long time, then nodded. "I kept your kit. The one you told me to burn." He disappeared inside and returned with a small black duffel bag, military issue, weathered, still sealed. He tossed it onto the porch table. Daniel unzipped it slowly. Inside lay a set of encrypted radios, a folded uniform patch, Ranger medic, and a handgun wrapped in cloth. Underneath, an envelope. Daniel opened it. Inside was a photograph. A girl, 7 years old, smiling with missing teeth. Sophie. His throat tightened. "You kept this?" Gabe shrugged. "Someone had to." Daniel slipped the photo into his pocket. "Thank you." Inside, Mira was tending to Ella, who was wrapped in a blanket near the fire. The child's fever had broken during the drive, but she was pale, fragile. Mira looked up as Daniel entered. "How is she?" he asked. "Better," Mira said softly. "She keeps asking when we can go home." Daniel hesitated. "Soon." "You don't believe that," she said, watching his eyes. He didn't answer. Instead, he crouched beside the fire, staring into the embers. "Lucan's going to paint you as a traitor. He'll turn Novodyne against itself before admitting what he's done. But that data drive, it's enough to break him if we can get it to the right people." Mira's expression hardened. "Then we do it. We fight back." He met her gaze. "You're not a soldier." Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. "Neither were you. Once." Evening settled over the lake like a curtain. The 3 adults sat outside as Ella slept, the air filled with the steady whisper of water against the shore. "Lucan owns every outlet in the city," Gabe said. "You can't just hand the data to a reporter. He'll kill the story before it hits print." Daniel nodded. I'm not giving it to a reporter. He looked toward the horizon. I'm giving it to someone who owes me his freedom. Mira frowned. Who? Daniel leaned back in his chair, voice low. A man named Edric Cole, former federal investigator. He owes me a life. Gabe snorted. You're gonna bring him back into this mess? He's half retired. He's also the only one who can expose Lucan legally, Daniel said. We get him the drive, he'll open every sealed door from the inside. Mira looked toward the sleeping child through the cabin window, her silhouette framed by the flickering light. How long before Lucan finds us here? Daniel's eyes flicked toward the tree line. Depends how much he's willing to pay. And as if on cue, far across the lake, a distant light flickered, a reflection that didn't belong to stars or fire. Gabe noticed it too. You think that's... Daniel was already standing, reaching for his pistol. It's not fishermen. He stepped off the porch, his boots crunching the frosted grass, eyes narrowing across the dark water. Somewhere beyond the fog, an engine purred. Back inside, Mira pulled Ella close, heart pounding. Gabe shut off the lamps, plunging the cabin into half-shadow. Only the fire's glow remained, dancing across wooden walls that now felt too thin. Daniel re-entered, calm but urgent. They found us. Mira's voice broke. How? Same way they found us in the city, Daniel said. He doesn't need satellites when he owns people. He loaded a fresh clip into his pistol, checked the radio, and met Gabe's eyes. We hold until morning. Then we run for the ridge. There's an old ranger bunker beyond it. Still has power. Gabe's mouth twitched into a grim smile. One last stand, huh? Daniel looked toward the door where rain began to fall again, soft but relentless. No, he said. This time it's not a stand. He chambered around, eyes hard as steel. It's an extraction. The rain came sideways that night, wind howling through the trees, lashing the cabin walls like the fists of ghosts. Lightning split the sky, white veins crawling across the clouds, illuminating the lake in flashes. Daniel stood by the window, motionless, watching the water for movement. Gabe was at the back door, rechecking the old bear traps he'd set along the tree line. The click of metal was rhythmic, ritualistic. Mira sat by the hearth, clutching Ella's small, sleeping body. Her eyes fixed on the fire as if she could will it to stay alive. 2 boats, Daniel said quietly. South Shore, no running lights. Gabe didn't look up. How far? 2 minutes out, maybe less. The veteran gave a low whistle. Fast response. Lucan must have doubled the bounty. Daniel's jaw tightened. He knows I took the data. He won't risk arrest now. He'll send cleaners. He turned from the window. We can't win this with firepower. We buy time. Get the signal out. Mira looked up, her face pale. The signal? Daniel crouched beside her, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. Edric Cole, my contact in D.C., he's monitoring a classified frequency. If we can transmit the data even for 30 seconds, he'll intercept it and start the leak before Lucan can shut it down. Gabe grunted. And the only antenna strong enough for that is up there. He nodded toward the ridge behind the cabin, barely visible through the storm, a skeleton of rusted steel jutting from the pines. The old weather tower, Daniel confirmed, still tied to the emergency network. Mira shook her head. That's a half-mile climb through a hurricane. Daniel's eyes softened. You once ran a company that owned half this city. You know what risk looks like. And you know what it costs, she whispered. The first shot cracked through the storm. A window shattered. Splinters flew across the room. Down, Daniel hissed, pulling Mira behind the overturned table. Gabe returned fire through the darkness. 2 sharp bursts, controlled, precise. They're testing range, Gabe muttered. Won't move in yet. Not in this weather. Daniel grabbed his go bag, slung it over his shoulder. Then we move now. He looked to Mira. You take Ella and go with Gabe to the crawl space under the floorboards. Stay quiet. No matter what happens, you don't come out until I signal twice. Mira's hand caught his wrist. Daniel. He looked down, the thunder lighting her face in fragments. Fear, strength, something unspoken. If you don't make it back, she said, voice breaking, tell me this wasn't for nothing. He held her gaze. It's not. Then he was gone, swallowed by the rain. The climb was brutal. Mud sucked at his boots, wind tore at his jacket. The flashlight beam wavered across trees, bending under invisible weight. Each step was a memory of jungles, deserts, nights when the world was nothing but noise and breath and survival. When he reached the ridge, the tower loomed above him, iron bones slick with rain. Lightning flared, and for a heartbeat the world was white. He began to climb. Halfway up, his radio crackled, Gabe's voice, low and ragged. They're here. 3 on the north side, more coming from the lake. Daniel's grip tightened on the rungs. Keep them out of the main room. Stall them. Can't promise long. Don't need long. Inside the cabin, Mira huddled under the floorboards with Ella, her heart pounding so loud she thought the men above would hear it. The smell of gunpowder mingled with pine and smoke. Through the cracks, she saw boots, heavy, black, precise. Voices barked orders over the wind. Then Gabe's voice, hoarse but steady. You boys ever pick a fight with someone who's got nothing left to lose? A single gunshot. Then another. Silence. Mira closed her eyes, holding Ella tighter. At the tower's summit, Daniel fought the wind like a living thing. His fingers were numb, the cold biting through muscle and bone. He anchored himself against the mast, connected the small transmitter to the corroded port, and flipped the switch. The device hummed, lights flickering weakly. He slid the data drive into the slot and keyed in the encryption code. Transmission initialized, signal range. 12 miles, bandwidth unstable. He pressed the transmitter to his ear, shouting over the storm. Edric, it's Cross. You reading me? Static. Then, Daniel? The voice was faint but real. Christ, you're alive! What the hell? No time, Daniel shouted. Data packet incoming. Novodyne. Drex. Everything. Copy. I'll start the upload. Wait, your signal's bouncing. Lightning struck the tower, blinding white. Daniel's hand shot out, grabbing the metal frame just as the surge passed through the cables. The smell of ozone filled the air, but the transmitter stayed online. Transfer 42%, 68%, 91%, complete. Daniel exhaled, closing his eyes. It's done. Got it, Edric's voice said. You just blew the top off a billion-dollar empire. Now get out of there. But Daniel's reply was drowned by the whine of an approaching engine. Too loud, too close. He looked down. Headlights cut through the fog, black SUVs circling the cabin below like wolves. He unclipped the transmitter, slid it into his jacket, and began the descent. By the time he reached the clearing, the cabin was half on fire. Gabe was kneeling behind a fallen beam, reloading. Mira was on the porch, gripping a revolver with trembling hands, the girl huddled behind her. Daniel sprinted through the smoke, firing twice, dropping the nearest attacker. Move, he shouted. They know the signal's out. Gabe barked a laugh through the chaos. Good. Let 'em know who burned their castle. They fell back toward the tree line, bullets sparking against the stone chimney. Rain turned ash to mud. The sound was endless. Thunder, gunfire, breath. Then, from the distance came the low thump of helicopter blades. Mira froze. No, not again. Daniel grabbed her arm. That's not Lucan's. It's his. A spotlight cut through the storm, illuminating the clearing. The helicopter's side door opened, and a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. Ranger Cross! This is Agent Cole. We have your location. Get your people out now! Gabe whooped. I'll be damned. The extraction was chaos and grace all at once. Daniel carrying Ella through the mud. Mira clutching the girl's hand as the rotor wash tore at their clothes. Gabe limped behind, firing one last shot into the tree line. When they finally lifted off, the cabin below was a burning speck swallowed by the lake. Rain lashed the windshield, and the city glimmered faintly on the horizon. Mira leaned against Daniel's shoulder, trembling. Did it work? He looked out at the storm, the faint glow of dawn bleeding through the clouds. It worked, he said quietly. The world's about to know who Lucan Drex really is. Far below, on the shore of Blackwater Lake, a single figure watched the helicopter vanish into the clouds. Lucan Drex stood under an umbrella, his face calm but his eyes burning. He turned to the man beside him, Rice, drenched, trembling. Prepare the second phase, Lucan said softly. Sir, the data leak. I don't care about the data. I care about perception. The janitor thinks he exposed me. He smiled, slow and sharp. He just made me a martyr. Morning broke with static. Not sunlight, not warmth, just the flicker of 1,000 television screens lighting up 1,000 rooms across the world. Every major network, every feed, every scrolling headline. Breaking, Novodyne under investigation for corporate espionage, human rights violations, and murder cover-up. Leaked data exposes CEO Lucan Drex. The world didn't wake up to hope. It woke up to chaos. In a safe house 3 states away, Daniel sat on a wooden crate, listening to the endless hum of voices on the radio. The room smelled of dust and machine oil. A small portable TV flickered beside him. Mira stood near the window, her reflection pale in the glass, holding Ella close. Outside, sirens wailed in some distant town. On screen, Lucan Drex appeared, calm, immaculate, unbroken. The camera loved him. His suit was charcoal, his expression grave, his voice the practiced sincerity of a man who had studied every nuance of human guilt. I am as shocked and heartbroken as all of you, Lucan said, his tone steady. A rogue former employee, Daniel Cross, an unstable ex-soldier with a history of violence, has fabricated this entire data breach using stolen internal files. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities. But make no mistake, this man is dangerous. Mira's breath hitched. He's turning it around. Daniel didn't look away from the screen. He's doing what men like him always do, writing the narrative before the truth gets a chance to speak. Agent Edric Cole entered then, soaked from rain, his coat streaked with mud. He dropped a folder on the table. Federal investigations split down the middle, he said grimly. Half the Bureau wants to arrest Lucan. The other half thinks you orchestrated a domestic cyber attack. His PR team's running circles around the truth. Daniel rubbed his temples. How bad? Bad enough that your face is on every screen from here to D.C., Edric said. The public doesn't know who to believe. Lucan's spinning this as an act of revenge, a delusional veteran attacking the man who tried to help him. Mira clenched her fists. They're hunting him instead of the man who tried to kill my daughter? Edric's look said everything. Daniel stood pacing. So what's next? Edric opened the folder. Photos, satellite images, financial transfers. Lucan's got offshore accounts feeding a Black Ops network called Project Echelon, hidden under the Novodyne Foundation for Global Defense. That's where his private army comes from. Mercenaries paid under humanitarian contracts. He slid a photo across the table. It showed a man in tactical gear, mask off. Rice. Daniel's jaw set. His right hand. He's consolidating. They're prepping something bigger, something that doesn't end with damage control. My guess? He's framing you for a terror incident, something catastrophic enough to erase his crimes in the smoke. Mira's voice trembled. He'll kill thousands just to bury a lie. Daniel's gaze hardened. Then we don't wait for the world to decide who's guilty. He turned to Edric. We go to the source. We bring the evidence directly to the one place Lucan can't buy. Edric raised an eyebrow. You mean The Hague? Daniel shook his head. No, the public. By dusk, the safe house buzzed with a new kind of urgency. Gabe was at the radio rig, reassembling an old broadcast unit scavenged from Cole's agency archives. Mira was typing furiously at a borrowed laptop, patching video evidence together. Timestamps, security footage, the unedited logs of Lucan's assault order. Daniel watched her work, quiet pride flickering behind his exhaustion. You're good at this, he said softly. She didn't look up. Running a company taught me one thing. Control the story, or it controls you. He almost smiled. Guess we're rewriting the story then. She glanced at him, eyes glinting with something that wasn't fear for the first time. Together. Night fell like a curtain of ink. In the dim glow of the radio lights, Daniel adjusted the transmitter's frequency. Static bled into a whisper of coherent sound. Gabe muttered, You sure about this, brother? Once we send this, there's no going back. Daniel nodded. Good. I don't want to go back. The final frequency locked. A small green light blinked. Live transmission initiated. Global uplink. Active. Mira's voice filled the small space, low but steady. This is Dr. Mira Vallon, former CEO of Novodyne Industries. What you're about to see is unedited evidence of the crimes committed by Lucan Drex and his private security arm. You can choose not to believe it, but you deserve to see it. Daniel cued the footage, the assault, the blood, the timestamp logs, Lucan's own voice ordering containment. The feed went out, to 100 servers, 1,000 mirrors, 10 million eyes. But Lucan was faster than they thought. Halfway through the transmission, the lights flickered, the screens glitched. Edric cursed. He's countering, flooding the network with false data, deepfakes, overload packets. Mira slammed the laptop. He's rewriting it again! Daniel's eyes darted to the corner display. One signal, one, still held clean. A backup frequency routed through the old weather satellite network. He pointed. That one's manual. We can override his jam if we boost power. That'll burn the rig out, Gabe warned. Then it burns. He twisted the power dial to maximum. The transmitter whined, sparks dancing along its sides. The lights dimmed, the smell of ozone thick in the air. Then the signal cut through, pure, unbroken. The world saw everything. The silence afterward was deafening. Mira's hands trembled over the controls, her eyes glistening. It's done. Daniel exhaled slowly. No. Now it begins. The next morning, the world was unrecognizable. Lucan Drex's name trended in every language. Protests erupted outside Novodyne headquarters. Markets crashed. Politicians scrambled. And in the middle of it all, a single image dominated the broadcasts. Daniel Cross, standing beside Dr. Mira Vallon and her child, faces caught mid-flight, labeled in bold white text. Terror suspects still at large. Mira stared at the headline, rage boiling beneath her skin. He's still winning. Daniel shook his head. No, he's bleeding. He just doesn't know how deep yet. He turned to Edric. You said Project Echelon runs through his defense foundation? Edric nodded warily. Yeah, underground facility outside Baltimore, but it's fortified. You go there, it's a death sentence. Daniel's eyes were calm now. Too calm. Then it's a good thing I've already died once. Mira looked at him, understanding dawning in her chest. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about ending something that should have been buried long ago. Far away in his glass tower, Lucan watched the riots from behind tinted windows. His reflection smiled back at him, flawless, composed, untouchable. He poured himself a drink, the ice clinking like applause. You can burn my empire, he murmured, but you can't kill a myth. Then he turned toward Rice. Tell them to prepare the facility. If Daniel Cross wants to end this, we'll give him the ending he deserves. The convoy moved under a bleeding sky. A single black van, its headlights dimmed, rolled along the abandoned highway toward the outskirts of Baltimore. Rain had not yet fallen, but the air carried that tense, metallic stillness that always comes before a storm. Inside, the silence was surgical. Daniel sat by the door, rifle across his knees, eyes distant. Mira sat opposite him, checking the last data drive, a backup of the broadcast sealed in a waterproof capsule. Gabe drove, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the pistol on his thigh. Edric Cole sat up front, headset crackling with static. Satellite feeds blind beyond the next ridge, Edric said, tapping the screen. We'll be off-grid for 6 hours. After that, no second chances. 6 hours is enough, Daniel said. Mira met his eyes. If we walk into an ambush? Daniel's tone was flat. Then we improvise, like we always do. They reached the facility just before dawn, a sprawling complex half buried in the earth, disguised as a humanitarian logistics hub. The fence was electrified, but old. Cameras tracked nothing but ghosts. Through the binoculars, Mira saw the symbol stamped across the gate, a blue globe with a stylized eye, the insignia of Project Echelon. Gabe muttered, "Hell of a place to build a lie." Daniel's jaw tightened. It's not just a lie. It's where they built the tools that made men like me. Mira turned to him, her voice low. You worked here? He didn't answer at first, then quietly. Trained here. Before I left the Rangers, Novodyne was developing AI-based combat cognition. We were the test group, soldiers enhanced by predictive analytics, conditioned to move before thought. We called it the Ghost Circuit. She froze. You mean Lucan used you as an experiment? Daniel nodded once. And I let him. They cut the power grid and slipped inside. The corridors were narrow, lined with flickering lights and the hum of dying generators. The deeper they went, the colder it became, the air thick with the scent of steel and antiseptic. Edric whispered, Level 3's where they kept the servers. If the mainframe's intact, we'll find every transaction, every Black Ops directive he's buried. Daniel raised a fist. Halt. Voices. 2 guards at the junction ahead. He gestured, silent language flowing between them. Gabe circled left. Edric took the right flank. In 5 seconds it was over. 2 muffled shots, 2 bodies down. Mira looked away, her breath shaking. Daniel noticed. You don't have to see this part. She forced herself to meet his gaze. If you can live it, I can look at it. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not comfort, but respect. They reached the core chamber, a vast circular room lit by a single column of blue light. Hundreds of drives hummed in concentric rings, each labeled with strings of numbers and words like echelon, beta human performance, social sentiment targeting, media control simulation. Mira approached one terminal, scrolling through directories. Her face paled. Oh my God. Daniel. He wasn't just manipulating markets. He was predicting behavior, mapping personalities, governments, even entire cities. Edric's fingers flew across the keyboard. These are neural modeling files, psychological mirrors of key leaders, journalists, CEOs. He's been using AI to rewrite human decision patterns. Gabe swore under his breath. He's been playing God. Daniel stared at the blue glow. No. He's been rehearsing the apocalypse. A sudden click echoed through the chamber, the unmistakable sound of a safety being released. They turned. At the upper balcony, a figure stepped out of the shadows, flanked by armed men. Lucan Drex. His voice carried, calm and razor-sharp. You should have stayed in the dirt, Daniel. That's where ghosts belong. Daniel raised his weapon. You built this. You turned people into code, into assets. Lucan smiled faintly. I built the next evolution of humanity. You were just the prototype that ran away. He gestured to the guards. Kill the rest. Bring him to me alive. Bullets tore through the air. The chamber erupted into chaos. Mira dove behind a console, dragging Edric down with her as sparks showered from the ceiling. Gabe returned fire from behind a metal crate, shouting, "They're pushing left!" Daniel rolled into cover, firing 2 precise bursts, dropping a guard near the stairs. Gabe, suppress! Mira, the mainframe, can you pull it? Working on it, she yelled, fingers flying. It's encrypted with biometric locks. Lucan's retinal scan. Then we take his eyes, Daniel muttered, breaking from cover. He moved like a blade, fluid, merciless. Every motion was instinct, every kill a ghost memory. Lucan watched, fascinated. Still beautiful, he murmured. My masterpiece. Daniel's voice rose over the din. You made me a weapon. You forgot weapons turn. The last of the guards fell. Lucan retreated up the stairs, calm even in defeat. Do you think exposing me will change anything? The world wants control, Daniel. I just gave it form. Daniel followed him into the glass-walled observation deck, gun steady. You gave it rot. Lucan turned, smiling almost kindly. You can't kill me. You need me to open that mainframe. Daniel's silence was an answer. Lucan's eyes flicked toward the pistol. So that's it? Execution in my own cathedral? Daniel's tone was low, almost regretful. Not execution. Correction. He fired once. Lucan crumpled to the floor, glass shattering around him like snow. Downstairs, Mira watched the mainframe flicker, then stabilize. Biometric key accepted. Transfer initiated. Lines of data streamed upward, Lucan's entire empire bleeding into the world. Edric stared, awestruck. It's over. But Daniel's voice came through the intercom, grim. No, it's not. He left a failsafe. The system's heating? He wired it to self-destruct. Mira's heart leapt. How long? 2 minutes. Daniel, get out! His voice was calm now. You have to finish it. Take the drive. Get the kid to safety. She stood frozen, tears mingling with sweat. Not without you. Go, Mira. Then the line went dead. Smoke filled the corridors as the team fled. Gabe carried the main drive, Edric guiding Mira through the haze. Behind them, the facility groaned, metal screaming, fire blooming through the lower decks. At the edge of the clearing, the shockwave hit, a rolling thunder that threw them to the ground. The earth itself seemed to shudder. When the sound faded, the sky glowed orange where the complex once stood. Mira's hands trembled. "He didn't make it." Gabe looked at her, eyes hard but glistening. "You don't know that. Men like Cross don't die easy." Far away, beneath the collapsed structure, a single emergency light flickered in the dust. Daniel lay on the floor, bleeding, his earpiece crackling with distant voices. He smiled faintly through the pain. "Mira, tell Ella she was right. The quiet game never ends." Then the light went out. A month after the explosion, the world felt heavier. The headlines had slowed, but the scars were everywhere. Markets trembling, senators resigning, and the once untouchable Novodyne declared bankrupt under an avalanche of lawsuits and criminal indictments. Lucan Drex was gone, presumed dead in the fire that consumed his empire, but the man who had stopped him, the so-called Janitor of Justice, was gone too. Mira stood on the balcony of a quiet farmhouse outside Charlottesville. The morning mist rolled across the fields like soft gray waves. Inside, a girl laughed over cereal at the kitchen table. Ella was humming under her breath. She laughed the way children do when they still believe the world can't break twice. Mira watched her and whispered, almost to herself, "You kept her safe, Daniel. You really did." On the living room wall hung a framed photo, creased, a little faded. Daniel Cross in his maintenance uniform, smiling beside a younger Ella. Below it, a small brass plate read, "He fixed what the world broke." Mira had insisted on those words. Edric had argued for something more official, something grander, but she refused. "Daniel wouldn't want to be remembered as a soldier," she'd said. "He'd want to be remembered as someone who showed up." A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Edric Cole stepped inside, Rain still clinging to his coat. He looked older now, tired in the way that comes from seeing too much truth. "Got news," he said. "Interpol closed the last of the Novodyne cases this morning. Drex's offshore accounts are frozen. His board turned on him posthumously." Mira exhaled, steady but unsmiling. "Justice feels smaller than it should." Edric nodded. "Justice always does." He placed a small envelope on the table. "This came through a secure channel from an unknown sender. Thought you should see it." Mira hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a single flash drive and a folded piece of paper. On it, written in Daniel's sharp, deliberate handwriting, "For when the quiet gets too loud." Her breath caught. Edric's voice softened. "We never found a body. Just fragments. Could be nothing. Could be him." Mira smiled through the tears rising unbidden. "It's him." That night, after the girl was asleep, she sat alone by the fireplace and plugged in the drive. The screen flickered to life, showing a shaky handheld video. Daniel's face appeared, dust-streaked, bruised, but alive. He was sitting somewhere dim, emergency lights pulsing faintly behind him. "If you're seeing this, it means I didn't make it home," he began. "Or maybe I did, just not the kind of home we expect." He drew a slow breath. "You once told me truth is like light. It saves, but it also blinds. Maybe you were right. The world's awake now, Mira. You and Ella, you're the light that stays on when the storm's done. Don't let anyone dim it for convenience." His mouth curved in that almost smile she remembered. "Teach her the quiet game, okay? It's not about silence. It's about listening long enough to know what's worth speaking for." The video ended on a single image. The lake at dawn, water still as glass. Then, black. The next morning, Ella found Mira sitting on the porch steps, coffee steaming beside her. "Mom?" the little girl asked. "Did Daniel send another story?" Mira smiled, pulling her close. "Yes, sweetheart. A good one. About brave people who fixed broken things." Ella tilted her head. "Does it have an ending?" Mira looked out at the sunrise breaking through fog, painting the fields in gold. "Not yet," she whispered. "Some stories don't end. They just grow quiet." Months later, at a memorial service held near the rebuilt Novodyne Tower, a quiet figure stood at the edge of the crowd. A hood pulled low, hands gloved. He placed a single sunflower at the base of the monument. No one noticed when he walked away, but somewhere in the tower's automated security feed, an old access code flickered briefly across the screen. ID. D-Cross. Active. News outlets would later call it the clean sweep. Novodyne's fall became a warning to empires that thought they could own truth. Mira founded the Cross Foundation, funding trauma recovery for veterans and whistleblowers. Ella grew up believing monsters weren't invincible, only men pretending to be gods. And every year, on the anniversary of the explosion, a bouquet of sunflowers appeared on Mira's porch. No note, no signature, just the quiet. Because some ghosts don't haunt. They watch, to make sure we never stop listening.